Mic check.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for meeting us here this lovely weather today. If you don't know, this is Red Emma's, a cooperative, worker-owned cooperative vegan restaurant, cafe, bookstore, bar. It was established 2004 here in Baltimore. This is our permanent location. We bought this location, moved here 2 years ago. So yeah, in addition, a little bit about Red Emma's, where you're at. We have a regular menu, specials, brunch, catering. We have coffee supplied by Fred Coffee Roasters. There's a Baltimore Free School downstairs if you want to have a private event or do like a small organization meeting. There's a bookstore, 2 floors of books, various topics. You can also order from bookshop.org. There's a zine wall that I try to keep populated. On the very outside there, you can pick up some free zines if you don't have money to buy books. We also offer gift cards, stickers, posters, all sorts of cool, interesting stuff. Books that your mom will hate, books that your mom will love. We also have an online catalog where you can also look for our events and our newsletter. My name is MT. I'm one of the worker owners here.
Yes,
Very excited to present this book tonight. Some house rules. I want to remind everybody to respect others in your personal space. We want to make this space welcoming and friendly. So if you have any problems, have any accessibility issues, let me or one of our other lovely worker owners know, and we'll try to accommodate. Please keep your phone silenced for the duration of the event. And be mindful of your volume when you're talking to your neighbors or on the phone or anything like that. Any other facilities, accessibility questions you need to know? There's 2 bathrooms down there, down the ramp, 2 to the left. There's also a water fountain. We also supply COVID tests. We have first aid. We have a resource center, mask, water, all sorts of stuff. Food and drink will cut off around 8 and 8:30. The bookstore will also close likely around that time, but they'll be available to open it back up at the event, closing of the event tonight. Copies are available here or in the bookstore, and if you pre-ordered them, they're also available at the bookstore as well. And we'll also, I'm assuming, have a chance to sign copies too. Yeah. All right. So, without further ado, I wrote everything down because I'm nervous. I don't usually. So, we have Rasheedah Phillips, who is a housing advocate, studied at Temple University in Philly, one of the creators or the founder of Black Quantum Futurism and Community Futures Lab, the Time Zone Protocols Project, also wrote the Recurrence Plot as well, the director of Housing Futures and Land Justice at Policy Link, also one of the winners of the 2017 National Housing Law Project Justice Awards as well. And joining Rasheedah tonight is Jason Harris, futurist, educator, and cultural activist here in Baltimore, Maryland, and the creator of the Black Robot Project.
yes.
Yeah, and Red Lines Baltimore 2028. The book. So, tell us a little bit about this book. I'll share why this book is important to me, but I think time is one of those concepts that affects everybody differently. And as we'll see, there's also some scientific evidence for like why that happens or cultural reasons why that happens. My family comes from a family like sharecroppers, and so one of the things that my mom and my aunts did was they wanted to compile like an anthology of speculative fiction from their history as well. And in the book, you talk about like time binding and zines, or like time binding as well as the act of keeping time as well. And I thought of that when you mentioned that because I think of that as an important cultural practice as well. And like I said, I like to print a bunch of zines. I think of this as a very important time in history to try to conserve knowledge. And yeah, without further ado, we can kick it off.
You did fantastic. Give them a hand. Awesome. We have to give maximum respect. We are in a safe space, a revolutionary space, in a time where we need both of those things. So we salute the worker owners of Red Endless for maintaining this space through multiple locations, multiple iterations, multiple people. We thank you for that.
Yes.
Okay, so this is how we're going to do it. First off, I cannot tell you how excited I am right now to be sitting next to this sister. And I want y'all to understand in the context of Afrofuturism, in the context of housing justice, for this generation, this is Angela Davis, okay? I am not playing. And I'm putting that on you because, I'm putting it on her because she has already done the work. And this is just another jewel that she's given to us. And I can't wait to explain, to have her explain it and have her really run down what she's been doing because it is completely in line with the things that we struggle with here in Baltimore. So I want y'all to have big ears, really pay attention, because this is an important conversation and it's rare that we get someone who is actively producing work of this level with just a vibrant imagination, but also the rigor of a scientist. It's a rare combination in this day and age. So first off, let's give it up for Rasheedah Phillips. So this is how we're gonna run it down. Rasheedah's gonna blow your mind. She's gonna read a section or an excerpt from the book. We're gonna have a conversation. Then we're gonna open it up for question and answers, and then we wanna leave space for her to give us like a final statement, and then you're gonna go downstairs and buy a book. You know, I'm prepared to do like the evangelist, like put your wallet against the TV this evening, if I have to get you to buy a book, because it's that important. Okay, with no further ado, Rasheedah Phillips, Dismantling the Master's Plot.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. Tomorrow I'm going to DC for my last night on the book tour, and then I get to go back home. But so you're seeing me at the tail end, so my energy is still here a little bit, but just in case, you know. But I'm gonna read something tonight. I've been trying to read different things each night, just to what's going on with the vibes, what I'm feeling, what's happening in a particular community that I'm in. I had a chance to go to Philly, and I was in New York, but I'm actually going to read something that I read in New York that I'm going to read here, and I'll just get into it, and we'll discuss thereafter. Waiting time, stilling the movement of time in the white linear time stream. Wade, W-A-D-E. Old English waiting, to go forward, to proceed, to move, to strive, to advance. The modern sense perhaps represented in offer waited, wade across, specifically to walk into or through water, or any substance which impedes the free motion of limbs. Circa 1200. The figurative sense of to go into action or battle is recorded from the late 14th century. Another quote, Oceanos, Chronos, Greek god of the primary substance and the eternal river of time, controls all things. He is creator and destroyer of everything. As water, Oceanos encircles the world, forms its boundaries, and is the origin of all things. Barbara Adam. The amount of time it takes for a substance to enter the ocean and then leave the ocean is called residence time. Human blood is salty and sodium and has a residence time of 260 million years. And what happens to the energy that is produced in the waters? It continues cycling like atoms in residence time. We black people exist in the residence time of the wake, a time in which everything is now. It is all now. Christina Sharp. Sailing over a vast body of water for many days in a huge canoe with gigantic flapping wings. Ridoshi's dream the day before she was kidnapped onto the ship Clotilda and trafficked into human bondage in Alabama in 1860 at age 12, quoted in the Africatown History Museum in Africatown, Alabama. As human beings traveling along the arrow of time, many of us feel that we do not have immediate access to experiences of the past or of the future. With the past behind us and the future always moments, days, months, years ahead, we feel essentially resigned to the sensations of the immediate present. This is embedded in the conception of time's motion as a continuous flow, which has been a feature of European ontological thought for centuries. In 167 ACE, the Roman philosopher Marcus Aurelius called out the inescapable, unstoppable, uncontrollable rush of life by saying time is like a river made up of the events which happen in a violent stream. For as soon as a thing has been seen, it is carried away, and another comes in its place, and this will be carried away too. Even the Sanskrit roots of the word time reveal its connection, breaking down to tides and high water. The idea of water being used to mark time can also be found in the Negro spiritual Wade in the Water, which is said to contain coded instructions for escape. Though the lyrics vary, its refrain goes, wade in the water, children, wade in the water, God's gonna trouble the water. Often attributed to Harriet Tubman and her ingenious strategies along the Underground Railroad, Wade in the Water embodies a narrative that both veers into the realm of the apocryphal and anchors itself in tangible tactics of evasion and resistance. Despite the absence of explicit confirmation from Tubman's accounts regarding the use of this song, the oral tradition and the song's eventual documentation in 1904 through the vocal harmonies of the Fisk Jubilee Singers underscores the dynamic and fluid nature of Black narrative. These narratives prioritize the collective experience and wisdom over the rigid facticity often demanded by Western scientism. The mythologization of such songs in the abolitionist cause speaks to that broader tradition of Black temporalities, where the distinction between myth and fact becomes a site of resistance and reclamation. Black narratives, as seen in the oral tradition of Wade in the Water, embody a different and dynamic approach to truth, one that values the collective memory and experience of the community over the individualistic and empirical validations of Western scientism. This approach challenges Western constructs of time reckoning and truth rendering, proposing instead a nuanced understanding of history and reality that accommodates the complexities of Black experiences. It also permits a backcasting, where the future imprints information in the past that works to entangle the truth. In some quantum parallel reality that was made possible by the interaction between the relative past, present, and future, Tubman sang that song, at least one version of reality, made possible through Black temporalities. There are actually first-hand accounts of Tubman using religious songs in her oral storytelling performances and as plot elements in sharing stories about the Underground Railroad. Jean Humez documents that when recounting the story of the Combahee River Raid on June 2nd, 1863, Tubman ended it with a song that she improvised in order to assure over 700 enslaved people that they had support from the Union soldiers as they escaped to freedom. In this context, the factual precision of whether Tubman specifically used weight in the water becomes less significant than the song's symbolic essence and its alignment with known evasion tactics that leverage the natural landscape. The call to wade in the water, to wait in the water, suggests getting to the path, to cover your scent, to evade the bloodhounds used by slave patrols, which again aligns with known tactics exploiting natural landscapes. The act of wading or wading in the water permitted liberation seekers on the run toward freedom to steal back time, to create an interstitial moment of rest and safety amid their dangerous journeys. Used as a tool of resistance, waiting time averts the gaze. It avoids the surveillance of the slave system, just for a moment, of forced labor according to the clock of capitalist production. Unobserved, liberation seekers could exist in infinite possibilities, even if only for a moment. But in the waiting, that moment can be stretched out as long as needed until it's time to change again, until it's time to move along the stream. To wade, to wait in the water, to rest against the current, to still the tide, to submerge the master's clock was a revolutionary act. In the sacred act of wading in the water, we see that expression and that reclamation of time and space, of crafting moments of possibility. The rivers and streams of the American South provided that protective barrier, and many enslaved Black people risked drowning, risked being attacked by animals, and other dangers while crossing and wading through these waterways. Again, wade in the water is a technology. It's designed to hack the European time stream. It's also a path cutting through to the other side, spatial-temporally, closer to escaping the plantation and away from the plantation management of time. This interpretation further enriches the mythic narrative of Tubman, framing her actions as a form of temporal rebellion, where moments of waiting or waiting are acts of defiance against the chronological constraints of slavery. Also in her work as a revolutionary abolitionist, Harriet Tubman's scientific abilities, her nursing skills, her strategic prowess, as well as her trust in her own tuition, helped hundreds of freedom seekers to access liberation. Calling Harriet Tubman an unsung naturalist, Maryland Park Ranger Angela Crenshaw shows how Tubman's intimate understanding of the natural world helped ensure the safety of those under her care. One notable example is her mastery of bird calls, including the distinct call of the barred owl, which she employed as a means of communication, signaling the presence of danger or a safe path to follow. Information about the natural environment also showed up in her dreams and visions. In an 1863 interview, she recalled that prior to escaping slavery, she had a recurring dream of flying over fields, rivers, mountains, and towns like a bird. And at points in the dream, she began to sink down, where she would then encounter a group of women all dressed in white, who would hold out their arms and pull her across. Whew. That just made me emotional. Tubman claimed that when she came up to the north, the same places she had seen in her dreams appeared in real life, while she met and became friends with several of the women who helped her across in the dream. Tubman's upbringing in the swampy terrain of Maryland helped her cultivate these skills that allowed her to navigate at night, which was a strategic choice, tactically exploiting the temporal qualities of her surroundings and the limitations in communication technologies of the time. So during Tubman's main years operating the Underground Railroad, 1851 to 62, information traveled primarily through physical means, such as letters, which were slow and could take days to reach their destination. Can you believe that? The land of emails. Even with the telegraph becoming more popular during the 1840s, it was still mostly only used by the government. So advertisements for runaway slaves, therefore, were primarily run in newspapers. This delay in the spread of information was particularly pronounced during nighttime, when most activities, including the transportation and delivery of messages, slowed down or ceased entirely. Unlike the 24-hour world we live in now, where one gets emails, news, text, anytime of day or night. This delay in information transmission meant that news of Tubman's movements and the escape of enslaved people would not be immediate. By moving under the cover of night, Tubman significantly reduced the risk of immediate pursuit or interception, as any information about her activities or any of the enslaved people she was helping would only be known and acted upon the next day. So she operated with a profound understanding of temporality and its importance to the success of her rescue missions. That precise sense of timing was key for all escapes and journeys, and familiarity with the night sky. As we know, she aligned her journeys with celestial cues such as the North Star as a guiding beacon towards freedom. Her ability to operate in darkness and sustain profound silence played a crucial role. Walking for miles undetected, she moved with an absence of sound and visibility. This strategic inversion of the norms associated with visibility and audibility shattered the conventional boundaries of movement and freedom dictated by the master's clock. At 12 or 13 years old, a violent beating caused Harriet Tubman a lifelong disability in the form of severe headaches, seizures, dizziness, and possible narcolepsy. Hired out to a textile factory, Tubman was hit in the head by a heavy metal weight thrown by an overseer aiming it at someone else. The injury was life-threatening, and Tubman was unconscious for days. But despite this, something that had a lasting impact on her health, she would of course go on to become a leader in the abolitionist movement. She also had a reputation for having prescient visions and a prophetic ability. Many accounts tell of Tubman drifting off for hours, sometimes falling asleep mid-sentence, and waking up with detailed visions. A contemporary in 1865 quotes Tubman describing an experience of riding home in a cart with two other companions when she suddenly heard music fill up in the air, and she began describing a vision in a language that sounded like the old prophets in their grand flow. When questioned upon coming out of what appeared to be a trance, Tubman claimed not to have been asleep. Jimenez also writes that in interviews, accounts to journalists and biographers, and dozens of conversations, Tubman spoke of her own special gifts of foresight and her ability to consult directly with God. Jimenez situates this in a context and tradition of the use of religious vision as a spiritual, psychological, and even political resource, particularly by women of the African Methodist Episcopal religion, largely situated in northern states. Such religious visions allowed these women who were called to preach to convene directly with the spiritual realm without having to mediate it through a male authority. My voice is going, so I'm gonna probably read a little bit more so I can. That's very interesting. What'd you say? I got my time. All right, I'm gonna read a little bit more so I can save my voice for conversation. It's what happens when you're on the road. But the paragraph I want to get to is that, thinking about Harriet Tubman as a diviner, but one who also used hydromancy with what's called water divination to help facilitate her travels back and forth on the Underground Railroad. And I think her frequent comparison to Moses extends beyond abolition and escape, and really to the legend of Moses parting sea waters. Hydromancy is also called water gazing and water divination, and it's an ancient practice that appears in a lot of cultural traditions, particularly Afro-diasporan ones. I talk about it in the book. I'm reading directly from the book so you can read through it, but just noting that, again, for Harriet Tubman, she employed a variety of techniques, including being able to breathe the water, and also to use the water to heal. And that was part of her work as well. So she was able to heal, I think, folks from, here we go. Serving as a nurse and cook in the Union Army, she knew how to treat dysentery, which was a highly infectious disease often caught from contaminated water. And she prepared a medicine from the roots of a plant that grew on riversides. So her knowledge of the healing properties of water, her resourcefulness in deciphering and using water were all tools in her fight for liberation. And then the last thing I will say and read is that in quantum physics, space-time collapse occurs when a wave or a particle, initially in a superposition of all its theoretically possible states, suddenly appears to reduce to a single state after interaction with an observer. That is, when measured. It gives a result corresponding to only one of the possible configurations. Uncollapsing then would theoretically reverse this process. Restoring the particle to its original quantum state of all possible realities is to allow for a condition of pure potentiality, where every outcome remains viable and every path is a possibility. Similarly, the concept of the white gaze, disguised as the so-called objective observer, is particularly insidious for Black people. Under the watchful eye of white hegemony, a space-time collapse occurs when we are measured, when we are observed by the white gaze. Our unique space-times collapse into the Western linear timeline, limiting our possible configurations to what can only be predetermined in line with the hegemonic framework. When we are uncollapsed, when we are unobserved, unmeasured, and left to act on our infinite possibilities, we contain the degrees of freedom to exist in all states and to manifest all possible futures.
When I read the passage about Harriet Tubman, I thought about also, it brought to mind, and you talk about, later in the book, talk about critical fabulations, like imagining things and then trying to see if this thing that you imagine is tangible. Is it something that I can connect to that is in this temporality? So I feel that these things are what are necessary. They connect us to the mundane. It's what connects us to our ancestors, and it really empowers us to build new temporalities. So in particular, my personal muse, Toni Cade Bambara, she had an interview with colonial Salam in 1980, where she talks about leaps, which I feel, I told you, I feel it's analogous to critical fabulations. In particular, she talks about two more amazing women, Black women, Mary Ellen Pleasant, who's known as like the mother of civil rights in California. She's also the first African-American millionaire, and Marie Laveau, who is the voodoo queen of New Orleans. And in particular, she had speculated, Toni Bambara had speculated that these women during the Civil War around that time were operating their own spy network. But she said when she wanted to do the research, she said, I'm willing to go anywhere to get the information, but I am not a trustworthy researcher because I reconstruct. Like she was going to get enough validation so she could just go and write about it. And then she talks about speculating that Mama Pleasant bankrolled Harper's Ferry. She didn't know it, but it actually turned out to be true. Mary Pleasant sent $1 million in today's money to John Brown to help bankroll the Harper's Ferry raid. So, in unpacking this idea of fabulations and thinking about you actually manifesting going to CERN as, I mean, those of you who know CERN, this is where they try and create black holes. They're exploding particles. And it just seems unfathomable that one would say, hey, you know what, I think I want to go study at CERN. But Rasheedah went to study at CERN, which is amazing, okay? So in doing that, first off, in imagining that, because you wrote about it in a short story, and then you manifest it, when you get there, how do you arrive at this, this nomenclature of taking these things that you're conjuring and then talking to the scientists and finding this common language that refines and validates the ideas so that we can start building? Like, how did you take that experience and then apply it, as what you call a time binder?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And bringing in Marie Laveau and all these other folks into the connections and intersections are just beautiful. But yeah, to the point of critical fabulation, I'll talk about CERN in a moment, but the reason why it's so important to be thinking about that term, critical fabulation, that other Black women scholars have created and engaged in. But the reason why it's so important for folks, in the Black community, because so many of us are cut off from our histories in these particular ways, and speculation becomes so important in that realm to be able to connect back. For me, I don't have a connection going that far back. A lot of my family history has been lost. I mean, maybe can go back 3 generations at best, unless I'm like getting on, what's that, Ancestry.com, and having to pay them $1 million to get access to my own information. But on my own and just within my own family, it's hard to go back. And so speculation, fabulation becomes a necessity from unlocking, the sort of erasure and being able to uproot a lot of things. And so that's what it's really important in that sense. But in the sense of CERN and what you're saying, like I wrote, and y'all have a copy of Recurrence Plot and Other Time Travel Tales, which is a book of sci-fi short stories that I wrote and self-produced 10 years ago or so. And in there, I do have a short story where I'm talking about CERN, and part of where these stories came out of is just really, again, that critical fabulation, like erasing or questioning that line between science and fiction, between reality and unreality. And I talked about this in the excerpt I read in terms of like, what's myth, what's truth, what's fact for us. And so for me, science fiction is fact, it is truth, it is, the creative output and imagination. Those stories are reality in a sense. And so it was a manifestation to write it down, and we're an oral people, and we manifest through the things that we speak and put into and spell and put into the universe. So it definitely was a manifestation. I never knew how it was going to ever happen, but it happened, like very randomly too. They have artist residencies for artists, and like I found out about it like very randomly when the application was about to close, and then it just worked out. And we were definitely like the first Black artist to be part of that. Had a Black girl on CERN, Black person on CERN's campus. I mean, of course they have some Black scientists there, but very few and far in between. So yeah, it was just a beautiful, beautiful manifestation. And I went there to study this phenomenon called CPT, which, CPT, the acronym that we know it as, is Colored People's Time. That's right. But in the science realm, it stands for charge, parity, and time reversal, which is a fundamental sort of consistency of the universe that a particle should flow the same no matter what direction it's flowing in time. A particle can flow backwards or forwards in time. That particle should have parity. Like if you look in the mirror, what looks back at you should be the reverse of yourself in some ways, right? And so, these things pop up in like science fiction and like antimatter and matter, like it's all a part of that. So I actually went there having thought through these things and bringing their language to them. And I think it was a beautiful exchange, first of all. These folks were very open. They were very open to talking, to curiosity. And it really actually broke down a lot of notions that I have that I think society gives us about like what scientists do, what they're there for, what they're thinking about, how they come into the work. And it's so human in a way that like you don't just get the picture of. So like folks wanting to come in because they were curious about the universe, or they want to really like solve this like thing about time, or like these like just these regular, very human, cool things. And so folks were very open to talking, and I think in part because I brought their language to them. Like I was able to confront them with like, hey, here's this quantum physics theory. How does this break down? How does this translate into reality? And then how are you thinking about time in this thing? And how does that, again, translate to the everyday person like me? And then they were also open to hearing about, like, in that exchange, like, how Afrofuturism treats time, how I think about time as a legal advocate going into court. So it was definitely an exchange and a conversation. And what I took from it, the biggest lesson that I took from it is that, again, being able to break down this, like, objectification of science that happens, and to understand that it's relative. It's very much depends on the experiment. I got to see like all the different types of, I didn't get into the Large Hadron Collider. I got a little close to it, but
I hope not.
I know, right? But like in that experiment, and when they're thinking about anti-gravity, the terms of time change, right? And that tells me that time is actually fluid. It's not a specific thing. It really depends on the context in a lot of ways. And then I got to ask them some fun questions, like of people who are like looking at, I got to talk to both theoretical physicists and experimentalists. And so for like theoretical physicists who work with like infinities, I'm like, how does that translate into how you think about time? And if I were to make a clock that contained these like infinite numbers, imaginary numbers, what would that look like? So I got to have those kinds of exchanges, which really influenced what I could walk away from, and how I could sort of parallel that or align it or apply it to the idea of CPT, colored people's time, and that phenomenon. So I talk about that in the book and kind of try to break it down.
I'm glad you do talk about that in the book.
Yes, in lots of detail, because I know it's
We
a
gotta
lot.
smash the CP time thing. But when you read about it, a lot of the things, because when it gets put on you, I'm perpetually late. And people in here know, like, where's Jason? But after like reading it, I'm like, oh, I don't feel too bad about me. I'm in my own temporality. Like, I'm gonna try it at work, I'll let you guys know about it.
Yeah, and I talk about CP time as a survival mechanism, as a tool, as something that's influenced by systemic things, right? So me representing people who are low income, ending up in eviction court, was considered CP time, has sort of consequences for their life. Like,
I want to come back to
okay, all right.
Because there's a story in here. Okay.
Okay.
We'll come back to that.
We'll go back.
All right. Because there's something very specific that ties into it. And it also ties into like how you're applying it, which is like, it's wonderful, it's powerful, and I want to make sure that everybody is aware of it. Okay, so the idea of developing what you call the time zone protocols, and Ruth Wilson Gilmore was here like a couple months ago, and she talked about the expropriation of time. And I guess we can talk about this right now, because as a housing lawyer and as a pioneer in regards to spatial justice, how are you applying these solutions that you have created in TZP to create change where we're living in, as you said, a determinacy, where everything is set, this is the clock, this is when it's due, if you don't do this by this time, you're gonna get your 30-day notice, after 30 days, the sheriff's gonna show up, like all that type of stuff. What are you able to do now with what you have been able to validate and apply it? Because obviously you've been awarded for your work as a housing advocate, and I know that's in part because you're an innovator, and I know that's in part because of the TZP. So could you talk about that a little bit?
Making me blush, but thank you, I appreciate that. Yeah. So in my work, as Jason said, I'm a policy advocate. A lot of my work prior to the work that I do now, I work at an organization called Policy Link, which is a national think tanky advocacy organization, and I lead our housing and land futures work, where we think a lot about spatial justice, and where we're doing work around reparative spatial justice, so thinking specifically about the element of repair, and of course the element of repair calls back to time specifically in terms of what we're repairing, when was the harm done, how the harm continues to reverberate into the present. And I saw a lot of this in my work as a housing attorney. I was a housing attorney for over a decade, representing people facing eviction, facing displacement. And I've always approached my work as a community lawyer and as a community advocate, meaning like the sort of tools that I use are not always the traditional lawyer tools. Like I recognize when those are needed, of course, like folks need to be represented in court, there's things that need to happen. But the community lawyering piece kind of speaks to the longer term nature and also to shifting power specifically back to communities for self-determinacy to figure out what the solutions are that they need to advance whatever they need to advance, and then doing my part to support that through the kind of legal tools that I have access to. And so one of the ways that that world came together with my world of Black Common Futurism was a project that we did in North Philadelphia called Community Futures Lab. So this is a community that is, if you Google North Philadelphia, you will see all bad things, right? Just all types of disparaging things. You will not see sort of the beautiful Black and brown histories of that community, anything, jazz histories. Malcolm X lived in that neighborhood for a couple months, all sorts of things. But those narratives were left out of the story. And the sort of current state of things, which is that it's a high poverty area, high crime area, blah blah blah. Also disconnected from the fact that that area was redlined significantly, continues to be redlined. So anyway, there was a plan to redevelop this community through eminent domain and by displacing the 500 or so residents that were in that community. And so we were able to open up a space called Community Futures Lab while this was happening. I was representing a lot of the tenants. I was involved in a lot of the policy work to try to slow down or support residents in transitioning from the displacement that was happening, all in the name of, again, redeveloping this neighborhood because it was supposedly blighted and the people there had no hope for a future unless the government came in to intervene. And so it was really important to use various different types of tools, both the sort of legal, traditional policy tools that are also a double-edged sword, and that policy is harmful. These same policies, right, are harming people, and then to have to use policy to try to interact and counteract that harm is ultimately, in some ways, futile. When we're talking about like specific legal and government policy and all those things, it is definitely using the master's tool to try to dismantle the master's house. But pairing that with these other kinds of Afrofuturist specific tools that privilege the memories of that community, going in and working with that community to record oral futures, what we call oral futures interviews with them, opening that space where folks could come in and like we would hold workshops each month, but the workshops were like, show up when you want, show up halfway through, show up at the end and come get some resources, show up, sit, come in, yell, leave if you want, right? Like a space quite like this, right? And that was like also a way, again, to document the memories and the things that weren't coming up in this narrative about why this community was being destroyed by Philadelphia and the city government and the housing authority. So all that to say, I don't know where I was leading with that, but to say that thinking very specifically about like time in these things, time is always the invisible factor. Particularly in my housing work, particularly when we're talking about the displacement of communities. It impacts the future for the long term. Like for this particular community, it took over 10 years to redevelop it. And when they redeveloped it, they're bringing back $500,000 townhomes to that community, which on average houses were like $30,000 valued at that. And again, the homeowners and the people who were in these high rises that were demolished were scattered to the four winds, and like, yes, they have a right to return potentially, but what are they returning to? What's happened to them in the 10 years since they were scattered to the four winds of the city? We know for low income people, the likelihood that they're gonna be able to return to a neighborhood that is now higher cost, and exactly, can't afford it, and then the fabric of their community has been destroyed. None of their neighbors, none of the people that they know are there, none of their networks. So all of that to say that, like, there are tools to sort of counteract some of that stuff, and ultimately, right, it's an ongoing situation. That community continues to fight back. But yeah, we have tools, and they have to like operate alongside of these sort of traditional policy tools, and disrupting the sort of time punishment that comes along with these policies is really important. Because again, you can have a policy where, again, the government can come by eminent domain, take away everybody's future, take away the wealth that they might have built up from their homes, offer them whatever they want, and then just scatter them. It disrupts both the past, that continuity of communal history, and it disrupts the future, and it forecloses people from accessing the future in a lot of ways. Generational, absolutely.
Definitely generational.
Exactly.
Let's see.
The same thing happened.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So I'm gonna do like maybe 2 more questions, and we're gonna go to Q&A. In the movie, how many of you seen Arrival? Like, I love Arrival.
So good.
I love
I've seen it.
Arrival.
No,
Yeah, I watch. Sometimes that's just like, oh,
Put it on.
I just need to watch her
Is it-
draw.
Is that a new movie?
This is not
about
too.
5 years ago,
Yeah.
maybe a little longer than that.
Yeah. It's a French filmmaker, Denis Villeneuve, and he's known for like, he made the Dune movies, but he made this movie where a alien civilization shows up, and the star of the movie is a woman who's a linguist. She's a professor, and the army brings her in to try to figure out what these aliens are saying. And during the course of the movie, she ends up learning and absorbing this language that the aliens have given to the earth as a gift. And the gift is the language, because the language allows you to traverse time. And it's just like, the way it was visually articulated, it was like, wow, like, I think definitely my favorite out of like recent movies. But with that, with all that you've learned, that I feel like that affects a shift. So since we don't have Amy Adams here, I want you to talk about like what like personally works differently for you now that you're like, and I guess along with this, talk a little bit about like the differences between natural time and the other forms of time that we're like locked into.
And fun fact, that movie Arrival is based on a short story by this author named Ted Chiang. It's called Story of Your Life. It's brilliant and amazing. And his whole he has 2 collections of short stories. Yeah, I would say for me, Afrofuturism. Afrofuturism rewired my brain and how I thought about and experienced time. Just straight up, like, it gave me a language, like Arrival. It gave me a tool. It gave me a immediate tactile way of thinking about time differently. And that is just simply by the name of it. For those who don't know, the term Afrofuturism was coined by a white cultural critic named Mark Derry. But Afrofuturism existed well before that, of course. And he was actually, before that coining, there was actually a group called Black Futurism, a listserv in the early 90s where you had a bunch of Black futurists getting together to talk through what would become Afrofuturist phenomenon. But encountering that and immediately being like, all right, if we're putting the word Afro in the future, something has to be different. Something has to be non-linear here. And then also reading Kindred. Like, Kindred rewired my brain. Like, I've been a sci-fi fan all my life. And then when I went to college, I went to Temple University. I got super indoctrinated by the African American Studies department there, which was one of the first in the country. And so for a long time I was like, fuck science fiction. I don't see myself, we're always dying first. We don't get any fleshed out stories. Nothing connects to this. And then I read Octavia Butler's like, that's it, exactly. So that rewired my brain. It gave me a language. It allowed me to see myself in time travel. It allowed me a place to like break that, because that's how my mind works. Of like, I need to break this down. I was already kind of interested in quantum physics a little bit, but I wasn't applying it to time yet. But reading Kindred inspired me to write my own stories again and really return to science fiction, being a part of the Black Science Fiction Society, where I think that's probably where I encountered your work for the first time. Black Science Fiction Society, the website? Oh, maybe it's Facebook, I don't know where we met.
No, but I came to the,
Afro Features?
I came up to the North Philly.
Okay.
I came to see y'all because I heard about the oral history stuff.
Okay.
And I was like, all right, I gotta see what these sisters are doing. Because you had already put out UQF.
Yeah.
And when I read the first essay, I was like, this is different. Because the rigor, and just the rigor of y'all, you and Kane, y'all work is like, it's not just, we're gonna put on spacesuits and and with an Africa patch on it. It's like, you're thinking about Africa, Alicia Wormsley, there will be Black people in the future. And what are we going to do? What are the tools that we are operating with in this temporality to actually bring that to fruition? Like, that's what I've always observed with your work. So that's how I ended up there. I was like, okay, this is something, because I know that I used to always go to Martin Luther King Center to play capoeira. So I knew that neighborhood, and I was like, okay, that's kind of ill to have a time capsule thing in a neighborhood that basically like is caught in the empire's black hole, being pulled into nothingness. Okay, so my last question. I guess we're talking about black holes. The blackness of physics that you talked about a couple weeks ago. You were talking to Fred Moten, and just how do we make sense of the time and the schism? Because it resonates with us, this idea of what has been misnomered CP time, this idea that time works differently for us. Like, when's the service going to start? Well, it's going to start when it's going to start. If you Black, you've heard that like at least once in your life. There's no clock that has that on there, but we know what time that is. Right. It's going to start when it's going to start. So in being able to, through this work, recalibrate and reassert constructively our own sense of time, what do you feel it means to have that capability? Are we here to fix this temporality, or is our sense of time going to function as a portal for ourselves and others to escape into something different?
Yeah, I think I see it as the latter. I think I see it as our sense of time, getting back to the sense of time that is relational, that where time is derived from the community, where time is a source of open possibility instead of being beholden to the clock or the timeline or the calendar. And that is a psychological thing in some ways, and in some ways it feels impossible. And what I'm not proposing like we just reverse and we're able to just pick up and adapt indigenous and Afro-diasporan. Like, I know it's not that simple, which is why we need tools and we need to do it in community, which is what the time zone protocols is about. Is like, how do we shift timelines in community? How do we together get ourselves off this timeline of progress that we're never going to be able to catch up on, that we're always going to be racing ahead but always behind, because Black people originally were considered outside of time. We were considered uncivilized in the sense that we could not experience time in the same way as our oppressors, and literally categorized, and I talk about that in a book from some of the research that I did, categorized in terms of how we were perceived to experience time. And that is still the case today. And time is still being wielded against us. And in so many ways, when we talk about manifest destiny and all these other things, we think about it in terms of spatialization, but it is also about the future. It's also about occupying the future, taking the future, determining the future. And so in order to get away from these predetermined futures, that the conditions of the present have
indoctrinated us to believe that it's so hard to change the future. And because the future has been posed to us as something that's deterministic, it's already predetermined. The timeline we're on is headed on a trajectory that we cannot veer from. And we've also been told that because we can't see so-called the future. Right, and I talk about that as well in terms of like our sense of seeing black holes and how we privilege vision, the eye over everything else, when in the cultures that we come from, in our ancestral ways of connecting with the earth, it's not limited, of course, to the vision, right? But that's been privileged, and so if you can't see it, it's not real in our Western culture. So once we start undoing all that, right, like it starts with conversations, it starts with understanding, and I talk about, and just to refer back to your question, like this double consciousness that is akin to the Boysian double consciousness of having to experience and deal with linear time and knowing that there's other types and ways of time and being that we can access in our dreams, that we can access when we're off the clock, but that is not the predominant way that we are taught to move through the world. We're taught to move through the world in dependence on the 24-hour circling clock that we can't get out of that will. So it starts with creating time and community. It starts with, it starts there, honestly.
Wow. Okay. So let me do a time check again. Ooh, he's on.
Speaking about
That's
time.
like putting a button on it. It's okay. It's 8:02. So we're gonna take time about 15 minutes. We'll do questions, and then that'll give us Rasheedah some space to, if you want to read something at the end, or just give us a little more history about the book. And then, like I said, we're gonna go by books.
Ready to wind down.
Okay.
Go around with the mic in just a second, and I really feel Kim's pain here because every night that he hosts, he says something to the effect of like, "Oh yeah, I wish we had all night to talk about it." And I feel the same way. I have like so many thoughts and ideas, but we just don't have all night. So I would ask anyone who has a question to raise your hands high, and also be mindful of the span of your questions, and be considerate that other people also have questions too. So try to keep them pretty brief. I'm going to be really selfish right now because I'm going to ask you.
Yeah.
So there were so many things that I was thinking about before I even read the book, and then I picked it up, and I was surprised that you actually mentioned them. And one of the things that you that did come up was another author, Celeste Winston, who wrote How to Lose the Hounds, which she was talking about maroon technologies and maroon infrastructures, like the way that they organize to escape surveillance from slave owners and live autonomous societies. And you also mentioned the word Sankofa, which I believe is Ghanaian, or yeah.
Okay.
And it means to go back and get it. And so this is something I think about a lot, and I've been thinking about a lot recently. Well, what are the ways that we can practice these values that you introduced with the Black Confucius principles? How can we apply those, and how can we go back and get it without, while being respectful of the things, the life waves, and the rhythms and patterns that we discover?
Okay, you gotta stop there.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. So I think part of my practice as Black Futurism is to help facilitate and create these kind of tools. So we have a lot of different kinds of tools, some of which I name and talk about in the book. We have a practice called quantum event mapping that you can do in community with folks. Time zone protocols in terms of like developing protocols of how time is going to move in your community and how y'all decide to observe time together. And then I also, like I said, married some of that work with work around spatial justice. And so there's a lot of work happening out in the world, in the country, around reparative justice and folks using frameworks of repair to really advance us to a place of transformation, where we can see transformation in our communities and not just reform and band-aids and things that actually ultimately just reinforce the status quo or make it worse or deepen inequities. So, yeah, I think, again, for me, it just goes back to community. I mean, I know that's cliche, right, but that's what it is. Community is everything. Community is time. Time for me is other people. I feel like I can't, of course I have my own sense of time and sense of things, and it's amazing to be able to go into that sort of individualistic thing, but I function best when I'm working with community, and so a lot of the tools that we've developed in terms of thinking about time have to be done with community. I don't feel like, again, we can shift timelines on our own. Like, you can try, of course, there's ways that, I talk about this in the book, like PTSD, how that has functioned to displace us from time, and there's other forms of like temporal displacement that folks experience that can be, it's often a source of trauma and harm, but it's also an escape mechanism. It's a way to dislocate from the pain of the world, and that's a technology as well. Dreams are technology, but for me, it's like how you use it towards building community, towards shifting power, towards creating these new worlds that we need to create. And when we create that new world, we have to be thinking about time in that new world and how it functions. And maybe that new world is not one thing. Maybe it is different worlds in different communities. I talk about this in the book. Time is local. Each community had its own sense of time before it was globalized by the Greenwich England clock. And so getting back to that space where time is local and we can enter into different space times. We also have a project that looks at all Black towns and settlements. I know that there's kinship towns here in Maryland, and there's been a number of all Black towns and settlements. Thinking about how time functions in those spaces, especially non-linearly, to both connect to the past, connect to the future, connect to the present. So there's examples, there's models out there of how we do this, and picking back up on those models and continue to innovate our models, I think is important.
And right here, and right there, and right there, and that might be the only time, and one more. Yeah.
Good evening, my name is Lawrence. It sounds like I've been talking about this Rachel Heisenberg series for a while. There's a book called Melanie Price, Dreaming Blackness. She says that when you do public opinion research, Black folks normally...
Hold on a second. Brother, please.
Appreciate you, brother. Just trying to ask a question real quick.
No, you got it. We were taking turns. We're going to get to you, bro.
You scared you're going to take care of it. I don't take care of it.
Go ahead, Lawrence.
When you do a public opinion research of Black folks, the critical thing that determines whether they express Black nationalist sentiment is what they believe the race of the person asking them a question is. So there's a desire for independence, but in the white gaze, they're frozen. And I think in terms of the waiting thing, I think sometimes it can turn into wallowing because we're frozen in that white gaze. So some people are talking about crossing the river as an alternative to waiting and wallowing. And African St. Cyr have talked about that. So how do we prevent waiting from turning into wallowing? Because if we're frozen in the white gaze, that can mean grant money, that can mean attention. If we politic our trauma, but then we're waiting and we're not crossing over, right?
Yeah, no, totally. I appreciate the addition to that. Yeah, I mean, I think I talk about waiting as a technology in and of itself, the need to rest, to stop, to submerge. And in that sort of metaphor, it's averting the gaze and not being still in it. But I also talk about waiting time as in WEIGHTING, and also speaking to that, and I talk about that in the context of surveillance of Black youth, particularly with curfews, particularly the use of curfews throughout time to surveil and kill and perpetuate violence against Black youth in particular. So yeah, I don't quite have an answer, just to say that I appreciate that addition to that, and I agree. I think, right, it can turn into, if you stop too long, right, and it can turn into that, and that there's a use for moving through and continuing the crossover. Thank you for that. And I don't know if you have an addition.
No. So, well,
Thank you. Thank you. This is just a quick statement and may already well be known to you. You know, when each of Thomas Jefferson's granddaughters reached the age of 12, he presented her with a watch and a slave.
Wow, that's deep. I mean, yeah, I talk about Thomas Jefferson a lot and his use of clocks and surveillance, and I had a chance to visit his plantation and sort of observe how clocks were used there, and some of the quotes about his use of leisure time to go out into the fields, and you know, just juxtaposing that to, of course, what was happening. It just goes deep. So yeah, thank you for that addition. I talk a lot about that fucker.
So I have a question about critical evaluation. So sometimes it's a struggle being African American because we have fingerprints that are part of African culture, and then some other things that we've imagined that I would say like a Ghanaian or Nigerian would consider as part of their culture. Some of those fingerprints have to do with time, CPT time, or CPT, polyrhythms, and then other things that are part of our culture that are sort of like new or different, right? Yeah. Can you speak to how understanding critical fabulation can help us strike that balance of those fingerprints from the past that we inherit, and then those new things that we've imagined or created as African American people?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for raising that, and I want to, uplift that, because in the book, I also talk very much about Black American technologies. It is not all, everything is not, of course, it all ties back, right? But everything is not derived necessarily from that site. We have created our own technologies, our own tools, our own ways of being in time, just simply by the geography, simply by where we are and the sort of experiences that we've had to come, we've had to deal with here. So yeah, critical fabulation definitely in that perspective of, again, the things that have been lost to us because of enslavement, because of that disruption of memory, because of the ongoing violences against us in time. I talk a lot about sundown towns and how that's connected specifically to time, right? When the sun goes down a certain time, you could be murdered, you could be, and for those of you who haven't seen Lovecraft Country, the first episode gives a specific look at that. But then also in Lovecraft Country, there's a later episode, I think it's 8, I talk about it in the book too, where Hippolyta has a time machine, right? And like the sort of technologies that are being used there to allow her to go to multiple different points in time. To me, I call that, I have this thing that I call the Black grandmother paradox that talks about that and talks about the ways in which Black women manipulate time. And I'm speaking from the experience of being a Black gendered as woman in America, and sort of the technologies that I've learned from my mother, from my grandmother, and from folks that I've read, Toni Cade Bambara and Toni Morrison, and what she speaks about as memory, and what Black speculative fiction by Black women has taught us and has given us in terms of technology, in terms of how to think about it. There's this book that I love so much called Mama Day.
Gloria Naylor.
By Gloria Naylor is so beautiful, and the whole thing for me is about time, and they speak very specifically about time. It's on this fictional island, but of course the island itself is inspired by Gullah Geechee and the ways and those islands, and how time has been created there. And they talk very specifically about like outsider time, and then the time that's within that particular community. So yeah, absolutely, the book talks about this, and I always try to honor and uplift like the experience of the Black Americans and the temporal technologies that we have here, that again are of course tied to the Afro-diasporan cultural things, and there's a syncretism between them. But yes, absolutely, we have our own, we have things here. Yeah.
A quick thing, I would always think about like the example of like breakdancing. Breakdancing is like branded, like here in the United States, like open the doors, like all of that. But their time grants us literacy. Like as we think about different things and we say, okay, well, where did that come from? And you start digging deeper. and you dig deeper into breakdancing, you find out there were capoeiristas that came up in like 1971, 72, and they would practice in Central Park, and the dancers would come down and see them. And all of a sudden, and then it's like the history of like, the karate movies. And then with the onset of YouTube, now you see, these videos of like Sammy Davis Jr., like basically doing groundwork in a suit on stage. And then you'll find a video of like, a ritual in Cote d'Ivoire or Sierra Leone where people are like, doing flips and basically walking on their hands and like up rocking. So what we find is, I think, just like this whole idea of critical fabulation is, I think sometimes we get stuck in, because of how we're acculturated, it becomes like brand, and everything's like forward, it's linear, like, oh, this is innovation. But the literacy of critical fabulation, I think, is like ignoring that narrative and like embracing the idea that there's nothing new. Even if it's not true, even if it's not exactly how we did it right now, there's places where we can dig in our history and other parts of the world's history, these different temporalities where we get a glimpse and we're like, oh. And that in and of itself can be like a validation for what we've conjured, So I think it's important to like look at that, like Sankofa, like always reach back, because I think that broadens and deepens whatever it is that we're trying to like bring forth.
Yeah, and to your point, like this, our notions of facts and truth are so rooted in scientism. And when we talk about something being a fact, it's like pinpointing it on a timeline to say that this thing has occurred in this reality of history. But when you can think about it from, as you said, that language, that legibility of critical fabulation, it fucks up the timeline. You don't need to have this like straightforward flow from past, present to future. It's like, yeah, it does bring in things from all sorts of time and space.
Thank you.
All right. And so I think we have time for just 2 more questions. We've already got our question right here.
Hello, everybody. My name is Coley Tangela. It is absolutely wonderful to be in your presence with you. I want to say, first of all, I purchased your book, so I want to time travel with you in terms of you paying your future mortgage or rent. I would like to ask you in terms of giving us a new paradigm for looking at time. I'm an educator with Baltimore City Public Schools. I teach drama and form theater and educational literacy at Baltimore City Public Schools. But I find my work not going just for the children, but overgoing with their family. And I've been in the game so long, I'm actually beginning to teach children of former students and having them say to them, he's real hard, but he's good. And the thing about the paradigm of having your ancestors look at you, I don't know if it's a black African folk thing, but saying, man, I wonder what my uncle, auntie, grandmother, father would say if they saw me now. In your assessment of what I've been going through your book, is that a form of time travel, leaving seeds of wisdom that can be passed down verbally, emotionally, spiritually, as a way of guiding African black people through time, and also projecting into the future? Because I have my children, and I see myself time swirling, imagining, am I going to lay in them a life that will not only be tempered with the horror and pain and trauma of what I went through, but I don't want them to carry that burden. I want them to become self-actualized and become. So I'm hoping to see them happy, joyous, and free in their own beautiful African blackness. So is that a form of time travel that can be labeled as quantum physics or anything else? Because that's what I'm feeling, but I defer to you. I'm older, you're younger, but I will defer to those who know more.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. In what you just said, yes, absolutely. I talk about traditions of the griots in the Black and African community. I talk about Zora Neale Hurston as a griot in terms of someone who can time bind, somebody who can reach back and reach forward into time and bind it together. So absolutely, I think that's a form of temporal disruption, if you will, or linear temporal disruption. But I also talked in the book about how the future can influence the past. And if we're taking serious that time is nonlinear, we also have to allow that there's a backwards happening effect as well, that future generations can speak to us, that we as the future of our ancestors are able to reach back to them and talk to them and share tools with them, which is absolutely what we do, right? We have altars, we have other ways that we communicate with our past ancestors being in their relative future. So absolutely yes, and I think it is really important that we think about being open to the future and that we take into account and consideration as much as possible the future, because the decisions that we make today impact the future. And it's unfair often that, right, like we're fucking up the world, we're doing all these things to foreclose future generations from open possibilities. And so being able to listen to them, being able to have a space where we can reach back. And I talk about this in terms of quantum time capsules. So time capsules that are not just something that's buried in the past for the present to find, but time capsules that can reach back to the past, that can send our ancestors a map, that can function like kindred in terms of like being able to take tools back into the past and allow them to use it. And that, you know, I believe that exchange is happening. I believe that the future is possibly in communication with the past to help our ancestors escape sometimes, or to give them the encouragement to get out of that, right? So just convening and communing with the past, I think, is a very natural technology for us as Black folks.
Real quick, Brother Coley, good to see you. I will say there's a short story by Eve Ewing, a poet from Chicago. It's called The Device. And that's all I'm gonna say, like I'll let you, but it's a beautiful thing about like the future talking to the past. Like it's a wonderful fabulation of like what would happen. Okay.
And if y'all are sci-fi nerds like me and you've seen Tenant, you see where that can go wrong, right? Like where in a Western linear time sense, deterministic future, where the future may be trying to kill us in revenge for things that we've done, right? So I think there's a more positive relationship that we can view to the future than Tenant. Although I love Tenant.
Definitely. Okay, so we have one more.
Final question, yes.
Hi. So what really kind of spoke to me for a second was the question of how do we shift time zones in community? And I'm sure you speak about it in your book in detail. I'm going to get it. Don't worry. I just wondered if you could share a little bit of what you mean by that, if there are different time zones in one community, if there's, you know, how it looks like in one example.
Yeah, so I do have a whole chapter in the book called Time Zone Protocols, but there's a website called timezoneprotocols.space that has a bunch of what you'll read in there and tools in there. So I encourage y'all to go, and there's a zine that should be available on there, as well as recordings from, we did something called the Prime Meridian Conference, where we had folks like Celeste Winstead and other folks come and talk about protocols of time and new tools. So basically where that whole thing comes from, I did a fellowship with an organization called Verilist Center based in New York at the New School, which was a artist research fellowship. And the theme of that residency was protocols. And so in doing some research on time, as I always do, I came across the Prime Meridian Conference, which was a conference that happened where the time zones basically were decided upon, and not the time zones, but where the prime meridian for the world would be located. So
GMT.
Exactly, GMT. So the time that we all coordinate our time to was decided upon basically at this conference that was of white men, of course, no representation from people of color, black folks, except Liberia was represented in the conference, but of course not any black folks from Liberia. So that eventually led to, in addition to the Prime Meridian being chosen as GMT, it also led to what we know as the international time zones, and also around that time we saw the time zones for America set, and which was really done in accordance to trains. And so because trains were crashing, there was a lot of stuff going on with the trains, they set these time zones up to support transportation, in part, that's why. So all of that to say that time has a history, as Karen Barrard says, time has a history, and time is very much connected to imperial intentions and strategies and tools for subjugating the world. In addition to that Prime Meridian conference that happened in 1883, a few months after that, a couple weeks after that actually, was the Berlin conference, where they divided up Africa, right? Like they split up Africa, they called it the Africa Cake, and all of the imperial powers of the world decided who was going to take what and grab what. So time and space being sort of protocolized through these different conferences, through these protocols that were set for people sort of without their permission, and then adapted and adopted by other imperial powers that control our lives, control how we move through the world, and are not necessarily natural and are very much tied to politics. And so I talk about that in the book, I give some examples, but one very clear example of this is daylight saving time, right? And how daylight saving time impacts us. Another protocol of time, another policy of time that was decided for political reasons, for reasons of war, for reasons of economic gain, and the impact that it has on us, everyone, but on black people in particular, higher rates of heart failure, all these other sort of things that are connected simply by that switching of, not simply, but simply by that switching and artificial manipulation of time. So I talk about time zone protocols in terms of like, we can create our own time zones, we can create our own communal, getting back to that local time that I was talking about earlier, instead of time that is tied to the imperialist clock.
Okay.
This was fantastic. I had such an amazing time, and I want to thank you on behalf of the whole Red Endless team for coming all the way here, talking to us tonight. The book is Dismantling the Master's Clock on Race, Space, and Time. It is available here with my friend Ken, wherever he ran off to. But yeah, it'll be available in the bookstore. You want to hurry and go get your copies quick because they will sell out. But don't worry, you can still place an order online as well. Oh, there's Ken. So go holler at Ken for a copy of your book. I already got mine, extensively noted. But again, the cafe is closed, the hot stove is closed. You can still get all the sweet goodies and treats in the display case as well. But thank you so much for coming. And
Thank you, everybody. And I also want to shout out to AK Press. Y'all are amazing.
Yes.
Thank you for putting out my book. And thank you, Jason.
Rasheedah Phillips. Thank you again to Railers and the worker owners. And free Congo, free Sudan, free Gaza. Yes, that's it for now.